Creative Constitution. I'm joined by Benji Wragg on how to write a horror film.
Hey.
So tell me about kind of your experience with horror films. Is this something that you've always kind of ventured into, or did you go from a drama man to a horror man? Give me a little bit of info there.
Well, at a very young age, my sister showed me Mary-Kate and Ashley films. So I like to believe that from the start, I was introduced to horror films.
I love it. When would you say it was your first horror film? Like when you made one?
I would say, I guess Captain Vengeance is my first horror film. I don't consider it a horror film. I consider it more just a depressing film. But
did it have a monster in it? What actually is a horror film? What would you say is the definition of a horror film?
I would say a horror film is anything, and it's going to be very broad, is anything that inflicts the viewer with unease.
I like that definition. That's nice.
Yeah.
I think, and then it can have monsters and vampires and whatever.
Yeah. Well, I was watching a podcast with a YouTuber, called 𝐓𝐘𝐒, and he was talking about some of his favorite horror films, and he mentioned Promising Young Woman.
Oh, I've seen the trailer for that one. I haven't seen the movie yet, but it looks really good.
Oh, it is really good. It's an amazing film, but it's not billed or done or presented as a horror. It's presented as more of a thriller comedy. But he argued, he's it's a woman who puts herself in positions where she could be assaulted to teach the men a lesson. And he argued that it's a horror film because that's something that, that's a fear that many women have, or all women have in their, and, not just women, obviously.
Yeah.
Have in their everyday life. And that part of it, that unease of knowing what that sort of situation is and perhaps being in that situation is what makes it a horror film.
Yeah, it doesn't necessarily have to have some sort of a, sci-fi creature. It can, or a ghost, it can really just be something that when you watch it as an audience member makes you a little uncomfortable or has that unease aspect to it.
My dad, he's a huge war buff. He's pretty much a war historian, and from a young age, he was showing me war films and all that. And I don't have particularly big interest in war film, but there is one film we both agree on is pretty much the best of the war films, and that's Das Boot.
Okay.
And he argues it's because it shows accurately what men went through in a U-boat and how realistic it is, and and I always say I love it because it's a horror film masquerading as a war film.
Right.
And because the situation is breeds horror. You have to imagine yourself in that situation. You're trapped on this boat. You can't go anywhere. You just have to do your job. And if the enemy fires at you, either they're going to hit you or they're not. There's nothing you can really do to change that. So you just have to do your job.
Yeah. I've actually never really thought about it like that, to be honest. So, because when I watch a war film, it's like a historical film. It's not really a horror film. But with that sort of definition, then a lot of war movies that really depict how bad things were are probably more so horror films.
Yeah. There's John Carpenter has my favorite definition of a horror film. And of course, because he's the great horror master, so he's had plenty of time to think upon this. And I'm going to paraphrase him. He says this a lot better than I do. But he says there's two types of horror films out there. He's picture a group of people sitting around a campfire, it's the dead of night, a little spooky, telling stories and all that. And he's like, the first one is the enemy is out there. Something's out there, the danger is out there, and it could pick them off. Like, the second one is the danger's in this circle. It's someone in this circle. It's the human heart that's the danger.
Oh, I love that. And actually, to think about it, that's so true. I actually can't think about another horror film that isn't in one of those categories.
One of my old writing teachers, when I did units, he used to say he did gender studies. So genre studies. Yeah, and he basically would spend each week teaching each different genre, but he'd always open up with the same thing. It's like no genre happens in a vacuum. You know, it's like ever since the start they've contaminated each other. There is no truly just one genre. And I think that goes like horror can, go into any other genre. Like you can have horror westerns, you can have horror, sci-fis, you can have horror historical films.
Yeah, yeah, that's so true. You could have a comedy with a horror, like the slasher films. A lot of them have aspects of comedy in there as well.
And romance and drama.
Yeah, that's so true. I do think it's very difficult to make a single genre thing. I mean, when you think about it, everything has aspects of drama, or I actually totally agree. There's nothing that's quite in a silo. There's always cross contamination of aspects, and I think that's what makes the films more interesting. To be honest, it gives you more areas to
Yeah.
be creative in.
Like, once again, I mentioned Cinema Snob in the last episode, but two of his reviews come to mind where he basically just hit the nail right in the head. And he reviewed My Bloody Valentine and a different review, Stepfather. And both films, with My Bloody Valentine, is like, this is a cheap Canadian film about a bunch of miners being picked off by, some guy. It's like, the drama writing in this is top notch. I really believe this romance, and I want these two. It's almost a Hallmark film
Yeah.
with this romance. And he's like, it really carries you through. You'll want to see these characters survive. And he was like, with the stepfather, he said, if you cut out the scenes of the stepfather, committing murder and going nuts, it is a very touching melodrama about a stepfather trying to connect with your stepdaughter.
Yeah. That's so true. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that happens a lot actually in horror films. I think it's what gets the characters closer. Like when you add in like an undertone of a romance, it like makes you connect with the characters more because you want them to survive and have each other at the end. But then when one of them gets like killed, you're like, no, there goes that love story. But then that's what gets the character to want to kill the thing that isn't, that has obviously impacted that relationship and so forth.
Yeah, yeah, and there was a movement in horror. It's still going on, but it's something I detest. But it's kind of started in the 2000s. There was this movement of them like people going, people come to horror films to see the kills. We don't want to make them feel terrible by one of their favorite characters getting killed. So make them all assholes. No, you're ruining the movie because I don't want to see that character get killed, but how they die is a big part of the movie. And there's a lot of I remember Jason Takes Manhattan, Friday the 13th Part 8. There's a scene where there's a guy who's a boxer, and Jason corners him. And rather than being like the rest of the characters, who get scared and, he just decides to flat out, go for Jason and just punches him, just starts boxing him.
Yeah.
And of course, at the end, Jason wins by knocking his head off. But there was that moment, you're like, oh, come on.
Yeah.
Come on, you can do this.
I think one of the things I find most frustrating in a lot of horror films is just the characters making stupid choices. Like, or the classic, the killer's coming after them, and then they're like struggling with their keys, and then they drop it. Oh, I'm just like, why is that constantly used? You know, like surely you could come up with something new. Or like they put the car like keys in, and then it's just like, you know, it's like, god
Yeah.
damn.
I think it's like a lazy way to create tension.
Yeah.
Whereas with a lot of very good horror makers, they can create tension without having to do that.
I think, for example, Jaws, perfect example. You don't have the guy like struggling with like starting the boat and stuff. He literally just builds tension by like creating this kind of like the you know, it's like you feel scared and like up and tight because you know that this thing is getting closer, and it's not necessarily the chase, it's just like that anticipation, and actually
Yeah,
like the fact that whatever is the threat is taking its time. I think that's way scarier. It's like I don't know if this has happened to anyone, but like if I'm walking in a street and and sometimes I feel like I create these things in my mind where I'm like in a movie or whatever, and I'm like being followed or something. Like that is actually scarier because you know you're like slowly thinking that something's approaching. You know, you want to build that tension, and I think that is something really useful to put into horror films. That slow build.
yeah, no, it is. One scene of just like building the tension that comes to my mind is in The Thing, and it's the famous blood, scene where he's doing blood. You know, they don't spend 5 minutes of Kurt Russell attempting to light the flamethrower to no, they just need him like explaining what he's gonna do and then slowly picking up the blood and one by one. It's a very clever way because each time he's like doing one blood cell, he's counting down the suspects, so it's getting closer and closer to finding them.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So how do you go about kind of writing something like this? So let's take a short film, for example. You know, you want to create a cool horror film. You don't really know where to start. How would you kind of go about it yourself?
Well, step one is writing something on the page.
Anything, even if you don't
Yeah.
have any idea yet of what you're going to do?
I have a friend who's a writer who she hates like writing the first opening sentences because she doesn't know what to do. So she'll just mash her keyboard over and over again, and just so she has something on the screen, and then she'll start just writing random things
Yeah.
in. Yeah, because once she has something there, she can kind of move it.
Yeah.
I struggle with like the first line, the first opening bits. What do I say here? How does this conversation flow? And so what I do is I write basically a Wikipedia, like plot line of everything that has to happen in the film and everything I want to happen. And like that way it's all there. It's all on the page.
Yeah.
And then when I have ideas or anything like that, I'll like make a little gap between the paragraphs, and I'll write it in there. And it doesn't have to be like a full-fledged scene or anything. It can literally just be like, oh, I'm still trying to work out what this person says.
Yeah.
But that line is cool.
Do you build how do you build tension in your script, and do you write in things like this is a jump scare? Like how do you go about that?
I've never written in a jump scare, but I do have the idea that. So this is a weird idea of how I think of it, yeah. But it was something in one of my first writing classes, and it's just always stuck with me. But the teacher told me, he was like, I want you to write an argument here, and at the end of the argument, like when it gets to fever pitch, something else has to happen, that lets off the tension. You know, you have to come up with an exterior, idea that lets off the tension.
Yeah.
And so what I did was my little short story was two guys. Yeah, one had basically had stolen the other guy's wife. Yeah, and then he dumped the wife.
Yeah.
Because it just didn't work out, and they meet on a train platform. Yeah, and so how I sort of wrote it was as their argument is moving, that the train is getting ready to move.
Right.
So its engine is getting more, hotter and hotter. And finally, at the end of the argument, I, had the train whistle blow.
Right.
So in my mind, as weird as it sounds, when I'm writing an argument or something that has to like build up the tension, I picture it like that train.
Right.
Like slowly. So it has to be like something really small, and I'm like, okay, this line will be somewhere in the middle, so it has to be that sort of, basically think of it like a mountain, like a complete incline going up, and you need point by point.
Yeah.
To this finally something that's the release.
So how do we use that train analogy in like a horror concept? Like, would you use that for, say, a threat is around the corner in the story? Would you use that same approach as well?
Yeah, because it's something that has to build.
Yeah.
So one of the easiest ones I've seen, but it's still done to this day, and it's still the most effective idea, is okay. So I'll explain the idea by explaining another scene in a movie, if that makes sense.
Yeah, go for it.
There's a movie called Flatliners, and it's
love that movie.
Yeah, amazing film. There's a scene with one of the characters who has a very toxic relationship with women, and it's sort of presented that he watched his mum being abused and all that, and as part of the you never fully see what he saw throughout most of the movie, but as part of him sort of saving his life is he has to confront it again.
Yeah.
And they do this sort of long shot of him walking down the hallway, up to the room where it happened. And as it's sort of happening and all that, you see the apprehension in him. We see the sort of building and all that sort of fear that he doesn't want to open that door again. This is, his whole being. So we see this sort of going up this hill, yeah. And the final, the fever pitch is him, at the door, about to grab the handle. This is the height of the tension, the sort of, the bit when he opens the door and looks in, that's not about the tension at all. He's done it.
Yeah.
That's the end. That's the whistle blow.
Yeah.
So it's everything up until the moment, that you need to hang on. But you need to make it fever pitch, if that makes any sense whatsoever.
That totally makes sense. And I think we see that in horror films a lot, where you've got something that's building and building and building. The tension is like so high. And then all of a sudden a phone rings, or, you've got a random other character will jump in and distracts the threat from whatever it was going to do. It's like someone is walking in an alley alone, and then just as they're about to get picked off by like a serial killer or something, a cop car rolls by, or like a group of friends, or like a cat. Yeah, exactly. It happens all the time. So how do we make horror movies interesting with like so many different, I guess, concepts that have already been made? Do you have any tricks that you like to do? Genre crisscrossing? Do you have any like little tricks that you like to do to stay original?
Just broadly, like, your own experiences are original.
Also, creating horror films based on your own experiences.
Yeah, because the horror film isn't going to be scary to other people if it isn't already scary to you.
Yeah. Man, I have an example for this one. So I've told this story a couple times to a few friends of mine, but I wanted to do a horror film based on a ghost story. And we didn't have much time for it, so we ended up just doing it in like one day, and it ended up being like a 4-minute film, and we filmed it around the house. And when we finished, I don't know why, but I literally had nightmares about this ghost that I'd put in my film for like 2 weeks straight. For 2 weeks straight, I had nightmares like almost every single night. I was like imagining some of the things I had put in the movie in real life, and like I'd be looking in the mirror and like see someone there, you know? Like I just completely freaked myself out. And to this day I'm like, oh, I really don't like doing more ghost films. Like I don't want to direct more of those because I got so freaked out from my own film. And I think in a way, like those are probably the stories I should direct more of because I can use my own personal experiences to drive the fear. Like what scares me about that and then put that into a film.
Yeah, it comes from like a real place.
Yeah.
Like a film that I have up and coming, The Dark Cottage, is I did some work at a nursing home, and I did the dementia ward,
Mm.
and there was a woman among many, very sort of interesting and tragic people. But there was a woman whose dementia was so bad that she had actually no personality.
Oh, okay.
It was just all gone. And
Damn.
and the nurses told me, it started very small and all that, but yeah, slowly, bit by bit, her personality got wiped away towards a blank skate, and that terrified me, and I had a nightmare about it. So I wrote a horror film about my
Yeah.
fears of becoming like that. So.
Wow. Yeah, and when you were making that film, well, actually when you were writing that film, how did you kind of put those horror themes in there? Like, was that based on kind of your nightmare? Like, is that where the story came from as well?
Yeah, so in the nightmare, I was trapped in a darkened house, and I couldn't get out.
Mm.
And every time I tried to like go into somewhere that was light, like the darkness would take over it. So I kind of thought that could be a good euphemism for like the human brain like shutting down because of dementia, and the character running to the different room that's light, but she's losing ground, she's losing parts of her, you know. And there's also another sort of tragic thing you see in nursing homes, and that's when the person doesn't remember their family.
Yeah.
And so these will be strangers who are who are very much confronting to them, and they will react in fear. And I just thought that's a very tragic idea. So, yeah, I basically had people from her past in the film come hide in the dark areas and come at her, and she's reacting to them with fear because they're invading her home, and she has no idea who they are.
Yeah,
But
wow.
they're the most caring people she'll ever know.
Does that happen often when you say you have a nightmare or you have a dream and then the writing process is just a lot easier because you almost have a template to go off of?
Yeah, and it sounds weird, but dreams are very messed up, weird things that are non-linear and have no. But when you wake up, like your brain does this weird thing where it will try to put a story into it,
Yeah.
and so that's sort of the template.
Yeah.
I've also done like written stories that are just gone completely off the rails based on like a very simple dream.
I think it was like Christopher Nolan or something. I think all of his movies are based on dreams. Well, not Oppenheimer, but I think I've heard that somewhere. Um, well, I think that happens to a lot of filmmakers, to be honest. Like that ghost story was something that I had a nightmare of, or like in the past, I'm pretty sure I've lived in haunted places, but that's why I kind of avoid that stuff because it just freaks me out even more. But that's the power of horror films. You're able to like leave imprints on people's minds of like really scary things. Like I watched I don't know if you've seen this movie called The Eye. It's with Jessica Alba.
Ah,
And
yes, where she's blind.
yeah, she's blind and she gets donate essentially like eye donation, and she gets like eye transplants. But then from there she starts seeing all these like dead people everywhere. And that's literally like one of these movies that has like stuck in my mind for ages. And then there was this other one called The Mirror or something like that. I forgot.
Oh, it's one of my favorite horror films.
And I couldn't look into a mirror for like a week after that because it freaked me out. I was like, "Jeez, this is crazy." Or like I couldn't ride a roller coaster for like a good 2 weeks. Or like sorry, a good like year after that, because after watching Final Destination, I was like, I don't want to get split in half like that.
Okay, I have an issue with the first Final Destination movie. Not to nitpick, but it's a fantastic film. It's a great concept and all that, yeah.
Wait,
But
was
there
the
is one
first one
scene.
the plane? Wait, which?
Yeah.
Yeah, the plane one. Yeah.
Yeah. There is one scene in Final Destination that just I've spent years wondering about. I can't remember if it was the teacher or I think it's actually another student. But he's in a bathroom, he's gonna take a shower, you see like Def moving around, and then like Def leaks out of a toilet, so like the toilet water comes out, and then he slips on the toilet water and then like strangles himself on the curtains
Oh
and all
yeah,
that. Yeah.
I remember that
Yeah.
now.
And then the water retreats back into the toilet.
Yeah, because death leaves no evidence.
I know, but why? It's so.
I mean, half of the deaths in Final Destination make no sense, but you know how you were talking about that train analogy? That happens a lot in Final Destination. There is so much tension, and I think they do that really, really well. You're watching this thing slowly build, and you're like, oh, it's gonna happen anytime now. And then actually, they do it almost perfectly every time where you think it's gonna happen.
They
like
pull the rug out.
yeah, they pull the rug, and I think that's such a genius thing where like you think it's gonna happen now, but no, it happens after, before, or after when you think it's gonna happen, and I think that's so critical in making a horror film. You want to have
But
that
also,
build.
yeah, once you understand that, you can also like change the rules on that. So once again, like one of my other like favorite deaths in Final Destination is once again, what was Def thinking? Oh, you know what? I better retreat back into the toilet because if the cops come, the jig's up. Well, the cop's gonna walk in there and go, well, looks like he hung himself after that traumatic event. Wait a second. Water on the toilet. We've seen this before. Remember 77 when
Yeah.
those kids cheated Def and it came after them one by one. Yeah, crack it open, guys. Got another death investigation.
Yeah.
Right, they're gonna walk in there and go, oh, this looks like it looks like he took his own life. No, he slipped on the water. Oh, okay, yeah. Well, case closed.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
But yeah, I love the Sean. What's his name? The other kid. He was in American Pie, but like every death in Final Destination is like this slowly building up, and then this release of tension. And they do the car and all that. It's fine. And just the guy from American Pie just going, well, who's next now? And then this straight kill.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. You're just like, sometimes it just like hits you like that. I think some of the ghost films do this really well too, like Insidious and kind of those sorts of movies where it's a lot more of like the haunted things. It's like someone will go into a house and then they'll freak out in their own reflection as like one of the first scares. Like instead of just doing like jump scares, and the moment that they walk in, it's like bang, 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 like scary. It's actually really like slowly suspenseful. And then they'll write in, oh, a cat's in the window, or like they freak out in their own reflection, or they like they step on a squeaky toy and then they like turn around and it's their little kid or something.
Yeah.
I do like that though, because it kind of plays with the audience's emotions a bit and then kind of drops their guard. And then the moment the guard is dropped, boom, let's scare him with something super crazy.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say one of my favorite horror films actually really like subverts that, and it does it like in an ingenious way that's just designed just to like scare the audience. Like, because even in those sort of like scenes, like the cat jumps out, like the character gets scared and all that. But there's a film called Sinister, and there's
A
a
classic.
scene. There's a scene where like Ethan Hawke is walking through the house after he's heard like a ghost, and he's looking around, and then like his son, comes out of a box almost possessed,
Yeah.
and like it scares the shit out of the audience. But no, the next scene is him just taking him outside, and all that. He's like, it's a night terror. We've handled one of these before.
Yeah.
Fascinating idea of just like scaring the audience, but not scaring the character. He's dealt with this sort of thing.
Yeah. When you're writing in like the suspense and kind of that build, like on the actual page, whether it's on final draft or whatever, how do you tend to go about that? Like, do you have a specific structure, or do you do like a two fake jump scares, then a one hit, Like, how do you kind of build that suspense in horror?
Okay, yeah. So, how I do it, and this is how one of my writing teachers suggested I do it, was you can take your time on this. So generally, like a page is a minute, So you can, but you can take your time. You have to get down to the details.
Yeah.
So like slowly moves up to the door, pause. His eyes move a little bit, pause.
Yeah.
Like you can build this up. You don't have to just focus just on, the movements.
Yeah.
You can break it up to, and that's sort of how I do it.
What would you say? So I want to talk to the filmmakers, the writers that are kind of just getting started and maybe have that blank page and they want to get into horror films. Now that you've done, you've actually done a few and you have that experience, what would you say would be like what's your like takeaway advice for someone that wants to write horror films?
My first advice would be, and this will sound weird, is don't go out to write a horror film. It's go out to write a story. Like write the story idea you have. If you feel that it's, leaning more into horror, or if the idea is already more horror, then yeah, you can patch up things and move them to the more horror realm and all that. But it's going to be a terrible horror film if you strictly go out, I'm just going to write a horror film.
Yeah.
So like focus on what scares you.
I love that advice. So man's gonna be about crocodiles. I wonder, because there's so many great horror films out there. I think there's just so many ways that people can write this stuff too, and I think people have to find their own way of writing too. Like just like how your friend just kind of puts a random bunch of stuff on the page in order to not have that empty page staring at her. I think I have my own processes too, and I'm still learning how to write. I think it's such a skill that you need to practice, and your first draft I think is always going to be a bit crap. So if you just accept that, then you just move
Also,
quicker.
like that blank page is the true horror.
Yeah. Yeah. What would you say at the moment is like, I don't want to say the type of movie that someone should make, like when it comes to horror films, whether ghosts are trendy or whatever. But what do you think currently is like the appetite for horror films? Like, what would you say is what people are kind of longing the most at the moment?
I think this is just my opinion, and it's just the sort of films that I watch. But I would say it's more because we live in a very turbulent social climate. I'd say it's more films that focus on sort of social horror than say like the slasher guy.
Yeah.
Who's gonna kill you. Like I know this is very like a bit old, but like Get Out, I think really like changed the landscape in the idea that Yeah, this is more like a more subdued sort of, you know, this sort of horror movie is not going to be a blood and guts sort of thing. This is going to be more like, you know, interactions and there's that unease in it.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. There's a lot of sort of. It almost seems like horror films come in cycles. Let me explain that. Like it feels like the '90s were slasher films, and then there were like animal based ones for a long time. Like Sharknado and like Piranhas and like
I never want to see another zombie horror film.
Yeah, and then there was like exactly, and then the last 5 years were a lot of kind of zombies, and ghosts. So, what do you think is the next cycle? Is it those more psychological ones, or like it's like a social sort of horror? What do you think is next? Where's the crystal ball heading?
Yeah, I honestly don't know. I lean in the idea of saying like something more like isolation based because like the pandemic and all that sort of thing, and yeah, like sort of more end of the world type stuff, because I feel like people have a lot of fears that they need to process.
Yeah.
But sometimes it just takes one film to change or to invoke a lot of fear in a lot of people and then change all their minds, and then they write films in the style of it.
Benji, this was so interesting. So thank you so much for sharing that information.
No worries.
I'm very much looking forward to practicing some horror film writing. No, I need to practice creating stories based on the fears that I have. See, that's a big learning that I got from today's episode. So thank you so much, Benji, for joining us.
Oh, no worries.
It was awesome. And make sure to scare people out there. Let's go. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you in the next one.